Welcome to the Requirement to Process webinar. My name is Roland. I'm the CEO of the Gaia-X ISBL, and I want to take you through this new process where we introduce some agile methodologies on how we're going to proceed with developing and classifying requirements going from here. So the way forward is about what's the status quo, what we would like to do in future. We will talk about the guiding principles, we will talk about the benefits, and we talk about deliverables. The next part is the process itself. We will give you a high-level overview of the process, and then we go into the details. And finally, we touch about the maturity model to put everything in context. The last part of the presentation is just a quick introduction on how to. The presentation will be posted, and we will not cover that part, but all the important information will be on our intranet site for the members. So where are we coming from? Why did we even discuss a requirement process? The status quo is that we are developing complex documentation, and we're now starting also to produce software in the context of Gaia-X. So the problem is, at the end, we have a lot of workload. We have members that are working together. They have to be coordinated. Not everybody is dedicating full time. We are trying to have very different aspects of content, and that requires a lot of coordination. So in fact, we have, I think, 16 working groups and 3 committees today, and all the outcome need to be coordinated. We have capacity issues in some of the skills. So some skills we are very heavy on, some other skills we're missing. And with that, it is difficult to move the organization to a next level of efficiency, especially as this year, our main topic is deliver industry implementations. So what is the concept? The concept is, first of all, to get solid requirements. So in the beginning, we had a lot of documentation, and the working groups decided what we need to build and what we need to describe. But today, we are a way bigger organization. We have a lot of industry participation. We have lighthouse projects. We have groups that need to bring in new aspects. And so the requirements need to be looked at in a very different and very structured way, and it has to be efficient. And it all starts with getting a clear understanding of what the requirement actually is. We've seen this when we started, that a lot of requirements came in on a very high level. They were very unclear, and at the same time, many different projects required basically the same thing. So when you have this, you can either say, well, this is something that a lighthouse project needs to take care of, or you figure out it's something that is an integral part of the Gaia-X framework, and therefore we have to develop it. Before we can develop it, we need to understand the requirement. That is where we have the second clock wheel, which is the grooming sessions. The grooming sessions will make sure we fully understand the requirements, we fully understand their dependencies, we understand whether they should be part of the framework or not. And if we have multiple requirements coming in from multiple projects, so that we can align them, because in many cases, they are at least technically the same. Now, from an understanding of a requirement, we go into agile sprints. So we try to get, instead of having 3 months or 6 months until we wait before we get a new release of something, we want to go down to 2 weeks or 3 week sprints, which is a way faster way of producing stuff. And with this agile process, we can achieve 2 things. Number one is the next clock wheel collaboration. So instead of having one group defining something, another group trying to understand it and add their piece, and the third group to review it, and then having a meeting where all 3 groups can discuss what they were thinking, we say, well, you know, we have 3 deliverables, and we need so many hours of that skill, so many hours of that skill, and so many hours of that skill. We bring those people together and let them work together on the deliverables, which makes sure we are way faster. So these sprints in collaboration will be done by sprint squads, and we come to that in detail later. And finally, the end is a fully aligned product. Of course, we don't do real products in Gaia, but it will be services or service components that we're producing, and those will be fully aligned. What are our guiding principles for that process? Number one, it is a member-driven process. So the committees, the working groups, and the VCs, the vice chairs of the board of directors, define the guidelines. They decide on the resources and the requirements. So which ones should be done as part of Gaia and shouldn't be done as part of Gaia. And they also provide an approval body through the change control board. Number two is focus. We are focused on deliverables and their dependencies rather than formalities. And I know there is a lot of formalities required in an ISBL, especially in the beginning, but now as our cornerstones are well defined, we need to get into more focus on deliverables. The next one is transparency. So increase the transparency on progress and content toward the BOD, but also to all members. I'm a big fan of transparency, and that's why this process is fully transparent. We are using to achieve that the standards and the point Jira. So it's a 100% standardized process, and it's reported out of Jira. Even external contributions, like for example, the federation services, will be mirrored in Jira, so they have a complete picture. And everything is traceable from an initial backlog item through the sprint planning, through the mapping to the Gaia-X framework to the final release. And you can see the whole process as we're executing it as a service of the ISBL towards our members that help them structure the content and the delivery. So as I said, the current situation with the work groups leads to a high coordination effort. There is not 100% awareness of risk and control. So if you have very long releases, like I said, 3 to 6 months, it is very difficult to be early in the stage when you need to push against some things that go wrong, or you need to improve things that you think can be done better. The next thing is that the more we produce, the more we have dependencies and interfaces between work groups and work deliverables, and they are not clear right now. There is no clear milestone plan. As when we started, this was supposed to be a requirement process. When you look into it now, it's an actual end-to-end process. As we figured at some point, it doesn't help if we only have the requirements. We also need to find what skills we need and how many of those skills and where we get the skills from. So capacity management is a key thing that we were lacking in the past. And finally, we had extremely high communication efforts to agree between the different working groups what they're actually delivering and how we bring the thing together. So in other words, when I look at it, I always use the picture that we have 16 working groups trying to build a joint jigsaw puzzle, and everybody's sawing on its pieces and trying to paint them. And at the end of the day, we need a hell of a coordination effort to make sure it fits together and it shows the picture we were looking for. When you think that picture, it will be clear that the way forward has a lot of benefits. First, it's a cross-team approach, easier coordination, mutual interaction to one goal. High frequency means we have beta sprint deliverables. We can look at the quality of the product, and we can also look at the quality of the process. We can, for example, relatively easily find out that we have a lack of resources in certain domains, and we see if we can either motivate members to contribute more, we can motivate lighthouse projects to directly contribute, and we can even try if we can get freelancers to cover some of our gaps. The alignment of organizational goals shows the dependency, and also the external requirements and functional capacity is managed well, and we have a good communication factor. You will see this a little bit later, how we're going to advertise the sprints, so it's transparent when we need which sprints and who can actually contribute with their specific skills. So another thing is the question that we got when we did those presentations in person or in an interactive section was, how can the work groups contribute? Well, the work groups, on one hand side, define the guardrails. On the other hand side, they will be the number one source of resources that got put into those sprint squads. And the good thing is that when people come back from sprint squads, they can directly give feedback and say, we need probably the guardrails were kept and it was all good and we're on the right track. Or they come back and say, in our discussion, honestly, we need to see if we have to have slight changes in our guardrails, because it seems when we put this into reality, we have some issues, or in future, we need to get a certain directions. The member experience a higher output on what they're doing, and so we hope we get them more involved again. We could see some reluctance over time that members were not so eager to contribute directly. This is a way to contribute over a short period of time, very focused, and it's actually very satisfying to produce something in 2 or 3 weeks, way more than discussing documents for 3 months. We have clear timelines and due dates, which is absolutely mandatory to achieve our goals. Higher involvement leads to higher commitment, and we have a transparent and scalable process. As in the beginning, we're going to start with 2 parallel sprints. If we have enough resources, we can have more and more parallel sprints to speed up the development. So how are we going to achieve this? We started with a classical swim lane process you can see on the left side, and there was nothing wrong with it. The problem was it was just too clumsy. It took too long, and when you think about it, there is too many interfaces that you had to manage. Now, the new process is very lean, very straightforward, and therefore, rather than managing too many dependencies, we bring the right people into one team for a short period. Now, this is the new process on a very high level, and those numbers are consistent through the rest of the presentation. So when you then look it up offline, you can always refer to those numbers. So process step number 1 is requirement collection and quality check. That's a fully automated process on the intranet. It links directly back into Jira, and everyone can register their requirements there. The process owner picks it up from there. The process owner acting is Przemek, our program manager and process owner, and he will kick off the requirement grooming process. The requirement process is driven by the requirement by the sprint planning team, and so in 2A the requirements get evaluated, and we do dependency checks, and we are actually do grooming sessions to understand with the requester what the requirements are about, what are the details. So going from sometimes very high level requirements down to specification like requirements that somebody can really work on. Second step will be to prepare a decision. So what that means is that the sprint planning team will put together and group approved requirements, put them in sequence, and suggest that we do them in certain sprints. They will evaluate the effort that is in there, that is required to deliver. They will estimate the time frame, and they look into dependencies. So maybe there is dependencies to other projects. There might be dependencies to deliverable from federation services and so on. And they propose a certain sprint to start with. So these sessions are happening every week on a Wednesday afternoon. And after 2 planning sessions, the document should be ready for decision. So we go into a change control board. The change control board is staffed by the vice chairs and some C-level, and the committee heads, but the management team has no voting right there. So it's a pure member decision board, and they will decide usually on executing the sprints. If there is any disconnect in the sprint planning team, the sprint planning team might offer 2 or 3 options, and the change control board can pick one of those. After that, we're going to advertise the sprints. What that means is we put the sprints on the intranet and say, guys, in 2 weeks from now, we have a sprint with these deliverables. We need these skills. Please apply if you have time and you can contribute. And that's what I said earlier. It's a short time frame, so somebody can say, yeah, I'm not contributing 2 hours a week for the next 6 months. I can say, yeah, okay, this is a topic I can really contribute. It kicks off in 2 weeks. It only lasts for 2 to 3 weeks. I want to contribute. The moment the sprint teams are advertised, they have 2 weeks to apply. Then the sprint planning team will decide on the final team, and then the team will deliver the sprints, and the sprint will put down deliverables, which we call beta releases, and those releases will immediately be available for the members. It does not mean that those deliverables immediately go into releases, because it would drive the market crazy if we have new release options every 3 weeks. But the members can immediately start using those artifacts. So sprint planning in detail. So all requests, and especially for non-software deliverables, the way it works, like the software, the requirements come in through the Lighthouse projects or through any Gaia-X member or working group. And why is it that we have working groups in there? The moment we have a lot of stuff out there, which we already have, we need to make sure that every future deliverable fits. So the picture is when we're building a car and we already have a prototype there, a single group cannot decide on, developing a new rear mirror, because somebody needs to figure out if that new rear mirror fits to the actual car. So this is why all the requirements need to be in some place. The DSPC will help the Lighthouse projects in their evaluation and making sure that we are really delivering the right stuff and putting the right stuff on the shoulder rather than Lighthouse projects. So this unsorted list of requests, you can see the number one again is then in the system. The sprint planning team in 2A will start what I just described earlier. The sprint planning team, by the way, consists of 6 members from 6 different working groups, which we deem is at the current phase of delivery the most important group. So it's 2 members from 2 PRC groups, 2 members from 2 TC groups, and 2 members from DSPC groups, facilitated by Przemek and supported by Pierre as a CTO for technical and myself for the process responsibility. If this is non-technical requirements, so like documents or descriptions, we prioritize it, and then we have a sprint plan for non-software deliverables, which is what then goes into the CCB. If it is real technical requirements, so we want somebody to develop code, we detour. So we put the responsibility to the technical committee where those technical decisions should be made. They will always align with the Federation Services projects, because this is where most of the code is developed at the moment. And then they create a prioritized list of software tasks. Sorry, there's a typo in there. And that software tasks will go into sprint planning for software deliverables, and that is open. Again, it will be advertised and it is open for everybody. And this is also, let's say, the seed for an open source community. So why am I not doing full open source? I simply believe we wouldn't have enough contribution at this point in time to meet our goals and complete the Gaia-X framework as it is designed by now. So that's why we need to control the deliverables until we have this framework. From there on, obviously, there is open source contribution, which doesn't need that kind of control. Here you have an overview on the contribution mainly. So the committees and the working groups are there, and they are part of both the sprint planning as well as the CCB, as well as the sprints. Qualification of sprints takes about 2 weeks. Staffing of sprints doesn't take 2 weeks, but we give them 2 weeks time to volunteer on the sprints. The sprints itself will be 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll produce a deliverable, and that is a continuous process, and it has at least 2 of these. What you see, one would be for non-software, one would be for software. Again, if we get better in the process, this process is entirely new, so we need to operationalize it first. If we get better in this process, we can add more parallel sprints to speed up. Operations in a glance from one specific sprint, I think that makes it very transparent. So the self-service portal at the beginning is where you put in your requirement. It might be that large projects have support from the DSPC, but really we need to have everything registered there so nothing gets lost. It's full traceability. Once you have put it in, you get an email that your requirement has been registered, so it's fully transparent. Then it goes into a funnel where the requirements are selected, based on transparent rules and priorities, and we look into possible dependencies, work with the sprint planning team to find out what is really required. It's a close cooperation between the requester and the sprint planning team. And finally, we get a decision paper that we get into the CCB, which either endorse or arbitrates. But of course, they can also reject. But if we've done our work well in 2A and 2B, it's a matter of endorsement or choosing a solution. After that, we're advertising the sprints, which is the time for capacity planning. And so the working groups, all the members and the project can actually feed the sprint squads with individual commitments. And I really talk about commitment. So it's not a neutral group, it is individuals that are committed to do that. And then the sprint squads are working. The sprint squads are supported by our team as a squad, as a scrum master, so that they are helped with this agile process, because we do understand that not all of our members have a vast experience in software development and agile processes. That's why we are helping. And so they are delivering over the 3 weeks the deliverables that have been assigned to that sprint, going to beta testing, and then can be released. How to contribute to a sprint? First of all, information sprints are published on the Gaia-X intranet, as I said. Application, Jira members members in Jira apply for participation in the sprints. If you don't have access to Jira, there is another way to ask us to put you on the list. And feedback, work groups get feedback from the sprint members, as I said earlier, if the guardrails have been kept, what we figured out, if the guardrails need to change. So there is a constant feedback process between the working groups and the sprints. And the last important part that I want to point out, because we had a lot of discussions in the beginning introducing this process about, are we really doing products? No, of course, we don't do products in an industry sense. What we do is there is a lab prototyping maturity level, which means all the requirements we have, the requirements we get in from Lighthouse projects, the contributions we get from the Federation services, the things we're doing in the Gaia-X lab, all these things are contributing to the lab prototype. And this is what the ISBL does, and it feeds the Gaia-X framework that you see in this purple box. This is the most important part. Now, this Gaia-X framework then gets into some kind of implementation where we say this is industrialization of code. And this is done through the OSS community, but it's also done mainly to the Lighthouse projects like Catena-X, Structura-X, and so on. So those Lighthouse projects take the framework, and those Lighthouse projects are really encouraged to give us feedback, because it's not only a requirement, it's also a change management process. So if we need to change something, need to add something because industrialization of some of the concepts might turn out difficult or is missing specification, then this is where the loop goes back in. So first level of maturity is lab prototyping, second level of maturity is industrialization, and then it moves on to operation or commercial view. And this is where Gaia-X ISBL is no longer contributing directly. It's the members that form consortia and so on, and make sure they commercialize on the concepts and on the Gaia-X framework. And with that, I only want to point you to the last section. As I said in the beginning, please, when you need further information, need the corresponding links, want to understand how you apply to certain things, how you're going to get your stuff registered, this is all in the rest of the deck, which you don't go through right now, but you have all the information, all the links there to get started with the process. And with that, I say thank you very much for your attention. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask me or anybody on my team, especially Przemek, as the product owner, is the one responsible for the execution of this process. So please, if there is anything unclear after this presentation and webinar, please reach out to us so that we make it work. Thanks.